Okay. So now I forgot to bring my iPad with the text on it, but maybe we'll just talk generally today, and then we'll be more specific at the weekend. Everybody. So I'm happy to be here in San Antonio, my Texas home. Oh, I see. What happened?
Oh, the book is right on the shelf near you if you need it.
What? I beg your pardon?
The book?
The book what? I saw it. No, I heard what she said. I don't need it tonight. Okay. Well, I don't need it. Yeah, no, I do. It's somewhere there. Where'd you put it? It was just up here.
Let me see.
The book. I saw it just before. Was it just there?
How to Enjoy Death?
That's no, that's an older version of it.
Oh.
It'll get there. Don't worry. Don't worry. We'll find it. Okay. So what we're going to talk about is death. How to get ready for death. I mean, I think it's about the last thing we want to think about. When we do start to talk about it, and I think especially people really like the Buddhist approach, so people I've seen all over the world using this book of Lama's Opus, which I had the good fortune to edit, so I'm familiar with it, this one. And people from all kinds of people come from with different religions, people for their animals, people always want to help their animals, and they're so happy to think there's something you can do for your animal when it's dying, people really like that. And I found too often wonderful funeral home directors would come, wonderful people who really seemed just wonderful human beings. It was really always very moving, I found, every time we did courses on this, using this book. Because we know it's going to happen. We don't like to think about it because we don't know how to think about it. I suppose that's the point, So these teachings of Lama's Opus started, and I talk about this in the preface, back, I think it was in 20 years ago anyway, 2001 or something, I can't remember, it's in there. He was in France, at a centre in France, one of his centres in France, and one of his older students, a friend of mine, came up and said her old daddy had died, he was like 90 something, and she said, and I didn't know what to do. So I remember kind of being surprised because she'd been a Buddhist for years, and you'd kind of, what's that noise all the time?
People joining Zoom.
People what?
Joining the Zoom meeting.
Oh, I see. They have to ring a bell, do they? Can we turn the bell off? I've never met that, and I've done hundreds of Zooms, and I've never heard the bell. Never heard a bell.
Wow.
How do you turn it off?
You might hear the bell because you're a host, and the host can let people.
But I've never heard it. I know, but I've never heard a bell.
Really?
She's working on the bell. She's working on it.
She's working on the bell. Good. Oh, never. That's very fascinating. Keep learning new things about Zoom. Oh. Okay. So I think so. Rinpoche said he was very surprised, and then he changed direction, and the teaching became it's the most of what's in this book, So. So why would you want to face death without fear? One version, an earlier version we did of it, was called how to help your loved ones enjoy death. Why would you want that? It sounds like ridiculous, isn't it? Well, of course, now, so it depends on your view, it depends on your view. Usually, probably, it's only really people who've got a religious philosophy who think about, who think there's some purpose to thinking about death. Death, the process of death, because they all have a view about what happens afterwards, isn't it? But I think if you're a philosophical materialist, which is probably the prevalent view in the world, or the one that's taken most seriously in the world, which is that there's nothing that happens after death, you're gone, you're in the dirt, then what would you do? Why would you prepare for it? And I suppose that some of the reasons would be because you want to leave a legacy, you want to leave something for your children, you want to leave some goodness behind. That's good, that's useful. But there's no thing to prepare for. Why would you, It's a very interesting point. So as Lama Zopa says, this is absolutely the Buddhist point, and not just the Buddhist, because as we all know, there's Buddhism all over the world. Buddhism in Japan, Buddhism in Taiwan, Buddhism in, China, whatever. But it's really only, I would say, generally speaking, the Buddhists have quite a big deal to say about death. And there's lots in the texts, about death and the death process, and in particular the Tibetans, they're pretty much the recipients of what are called the more esoteric teachings in Buddhism, the Vajrayana teachings, And there's really great details about what goes on at death. In fact, the death process is described in great detail described, So why would we want? What is the point? Why is it important? Well, as Lama Zopa says, taking the Buddhist view, which we're going to go into, if you want to help anybody in this life, your dog, your pussycat, your grandma, when they need you most is actually at death. So of course you have to know what that means. Why would it be for a Buddhist? So the Buddhist view, of course, which is it's got a very unique view about who we are, our nature, and what birth and death and life are, and how they happen, the process we're going to be discussing. We have a consciousness. We have the term they use in Buddhism is for living beings is a sentient being. Tend to be in the Christian world, we talk about souls. There are so many souls in the world, and we usually mean humans that way, because animals, as we know, don't have a soul, according to Christians. But the Buddhists would use a term that's more general for any living being, a sentient being. But actually, I really like the Tibetan word best. It's and it's sem chen, and it translates literally as mind possessor. Such a direct term. And for the Buddha, there are countless sentient beings, countless mind possessors. Humans are a tiny percentage. They talk about different realms of existence, different types of existence. And these countless sentient beings, these countless minds, these rivers of mental moments, these continuities of mental continuums, they say. A mental continuum is one of the terms they use in Buddhist psychology. It's the main component of who we are. We are a body and we have a mind. The materialists say we have a mind, but it's also a body, not for the Buddha. And if you're a Christian, you have a non-physical thing called a soul. But in Buddhism, you have a non-physical thing called a mind. And this is where he's quite different. The Buddhist view is radically different from the psychological views, for sure, from the neuroscientific views. As far as the Buddha is concerned, the mind is not physical. The mind is not physical. It's not even a function of the physical. This takes a while to think. If you're a neuroscientist, it sounds like absurdly ridiculous. But not to be insulting to neuroscientists, you could say that the Buddhist approach to the mind, this non-physical, moment-by-moment capacity for cognition, the part that makes us a living being as opposed to the dead body, the difference is there's no mind in the dead body, it's gone, and the living person is the mind there. This non-physical energy. This mind of ours, it is not the handiwork of a creator, which of course is the Christian and the Muslim and the creator religious views, that there's a creator who then puts the soul in there in the egg and sperm at some point. I heard that the Jews say that a few months after conception, Christians say at conception. That's what makes you a living being, a human being, the God putting a soul there. Then you've got the materialist view, which merely is the egg and sperm. And then you've got the Buddhist view, which is that consciousness, a continuity of your consciousness from before enters into the egg and sperm at the time of conception. And that consciousness it comes from, it's its own entity, put it that way, it's its own continuity of mental moments. It's the simplest way to put it. So if you tracked yourself back to yesterday, you've got your physical and you've got your mental, and they're inextricably linked. And we're going to go into this when we describe the death process. We've got gross consciousness, which is our sensory consciousness, and that's inextricably linked to the gross body, Then you've got more subtle level of consciousness, and they call that mental consciousness. We have access to that even at our gross level, thoughts and feelings and emotions, but there are much subtler levels of it. And that's inextricably linked to a certain level of physicality, which is described, and we're going to go into this. And then you've even got what they call extremely subtle or very subtle level of consciousness, which is the subtlest level, inextricably linked to a very subtle level of physicality. And so if you tracked yourself back to yesterday, the day before, if you keep going back, you'd end up back at the time of conception. Each second leads to the previous, and at some point you get to the moment of conception. Well, the question is, the second before conception, where's the body? Well, we know the egg is in mummy's body, the sperm is in daddy's body. And where's your mind, your consciousness, which is inextricably linked to this body, that you track that back to a previous moment of itself. Nothing to do with mummy and daddy. Nothing to do with a creator. Didn't come out of nothing. It didn't come from a creator. It didn't come from mummy and daddy. And it didn't come from nothing. It came from a previous moment of itself. And then a few weeks before that, that consciousness of yours and the ant and the dog, whoever, was in a previous body, and so on and so forth. This is the Buddha's view. And this is coming from these Indians well before the Buddha. I mean, as the Dalai Lama says, it was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who really began the investigation into the nature of self. This is, Buddha came out of that extraordinary tradition of these thinkers and scholars and yogis. And this view of karma, this view of all the things that are also Buddhist views, he already had those views in his mind, but he diverged himself in relation to many other points, in particular, his views about the nature of who we are, the nature of a person. But the view of continuity of consciousness and karma has been around for thousands of years. And in the Buddhist literature and the literature before that, the Hindus, it was, it's dealt with vastly. But before we go further, it's always, I think, always important to remember, because we tend to take it for granted. If it's religious philosophy, it came from on high. That's how we just assume that. We assume that very deeply because it's creator and reasonable. If we are discussing religious philosophy that comes from a creator, then okay. But Buddhism does not assert a creator. He would assert very clearly there's no such thing as a creator. It's a mistake. He's not being rude. That's his observation. So the question is like this. I remember I always quote this. It's the only time I've ever been asked this question, ever. This fellow in New Zealand. I remember in Nelson, New Zealand. He happened to be a scientist. He said, who revealed these teachings to the Buddha? These words I'm telling you now, for example, the words you're going to read in a book. It's called Buddhist. Well, if you read it in America, it's probably come from an American, not from on high, not even from Buddha. Because we think it's religion, you can say what you like. I mean, I'm just Americans, Western modern people. We tend to think it's religion, you can't prove it anyway, and you're allowed to think what you like. That's very strong, actually, in religion, isn't it? I can believe what I like, I can think it means this and it means this, and Jesus means that, and Jesus means this. Because we don't think there's any reality there. It's just what you think, it's what you believe. It's quite irresponsible, really. So anyway, I said to him, he said, who revealed the teachings? And I said, would you ask who revealed the teachings about relativity to Einstein? And of course he laughed, and they all laughed. Of course you wouldn't. Well, the point is, that's Buddha. Buddha's like that. This, I find, is a crucial point. If we like Buddhism, if we're practicing Buddhism, if we're studying it, we have to remember this, because we're so totally addicted to the idea that religion is kind of this mystical thing that no one can prove. Absolutely, if you are a Christian, by definition, you can't prove it to be true. If you did, then it means you're God as well, and you can't say that. So there's a very powerful difference in the Buddhist view. Huge difference. You wouldn't say there's not faith, but I mean, you have faith in a doctor. Faith means you've got some confidence, confide, trust, with trust. There's no, you don't have to, there's not only a creator you have to have faith in, but the concept of a creator, and therefore the religious views that come from that religion are necessarily from on high. Of course, they have to come from God. Where else? They have to. But here, the point I'm making is, because it's not coming from on high, not coming from revelation, it's coming from a person's experience. It's really important to remember this. We tend to think it, but it's extremely important. Now, we've got to have valid sources. And we understand this when it comes to even a cookbook. A cookbook. No author would dare put in some recipes that they hadn't tested 1,000 times to prove they're right. They'd be shocked and embarrassed to discover they put in a recipe that doesn't work. We want valid information. And you know very well, if you picked up a cookbook, you know very well the information came from that cook, who got it from his mummy, who got it from her mummy, she got it from her mummy, and you can track it back, to people with experiences. So this is the Buddhist approach. So anyway, this information is coming here from me, and it's coming from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who's a Tibetan author, scholar, yogi. And that tradition has been in Tibet since 7th, 8th century, and that came directly, held in the minds of the holy beings at that point, across the mountains from India, tracking themselves back to the Nalanda monastic university system. As Dalai Lama always says, we are the Nalanda tradition. This amazing place of learning that flourished in India for hundreds of years. Well, it's ruins now, that's all there is. Nice ruins, I like going there. And that tracks it back to all the great scholars, tracking it back to Buddha, so on and so forth. So So, okay, that's just background. So the Buddhist view, which one needs to prove to be true, and this is, again, okay, I want to say this point. If we think that religion is belief, and belief can be very powerful, and that's enough to get you to the result, which is to be with one with God in heaven. But it's sort of like saying you believe in maths. You believe in math. I believe 1 + 1 is 2. It's a crucial point, actually. You can have confidence in your math teacher. You can have faith in your math teacher that they're telling you the right thing because your mum checked up and she said you're a good teacher. So you can have faith in them. But in the end, you have to learn it. In the end, you have to know it, the truth of it. You can walk around the world believing in math and you would get away with it pretty much because most people can count. But if your mummy says, go buy me 5 oranges, you cannot do that. You're not qualified because you can never be certain because you don't know how to count. So the whole point here, so this is the Buddhist approach, is, can we stop the bell, please?
I can't.
You can't.
I have set the setting to stop it, but it's not stopping.
What did she say?
She set the setting to stop it, but it's not stopping it.
Okay, we welcome everybody. I'm so happy to know you came. It's very wonderful. I can't believe it. It's the first time I've heard that bell. And I have done hundreds of Zooms. I'm not showing off or anything, I'm just telling you. But if I turn the volume down, I can't hear the people, so I can't. So I'll enjoy the bell. That means another human being has just popped in. I'm so happy. Okay, it's wonderful. I love it. Okay, so all this information, a lot of this information here is coming from the Vajrayana teachings. The explanation of the process itself is coming from the Vajrayana teachings, which are really only extant, I would suggest, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. So anyway, I'm just giving that as background. So at the moment, then, what we're doing is we're taking all these as that's what I like to say, we're taking all this as our working hypothesis. That's the way to say it. All right, so this book then, it's really a handbook. Two-thirds of it is all the practices numbered from 1 to 87. Because Rinpoche he will find mantras and prayers and sutras that no one on the planet has heard about. He's guaranteed to find it. So, and he loves all these different practices, and he recommends so many different practices to do at the different times. So basically, more than half the book, see, the back half is Part 5, practices to do after the mind has left the body. And they're all there, numbered 1 to 87. And they're done at different times throughout this process. And so the way we did the book was in chronological order, basically. So in other words, and of course, because Rinpoche is talking when he talks about death, he's talking to you in the chair, who's in front of him. But we have to be addressing it to how to help your loved ones. He's talking to us, and of course it's for yourself. But if the person's dying, they can't pick up the book and see what I'm going to do next, It's got to be to us who are helpers. It's really addressed to helpers. As Rinpoche said, if you want to help anybody in this life, when they need you most is at the time of death. And okay, I didn't finish the sentence. Why? Because, from this perspective here, it's at the time of death that your consciousness, that the karmic seeds that will determine your next life are triggered. It's a very technical process. So of course, given the Buddhist view that there are lots of options of rebirths and some are not very fun ones, you wouldn't want those. You'd rather, at the very least, get another decent human mother so you can carry on bopping on your spiritual path. And because we're all driven by the law of karma, which we're going to talk about, there's no person up there pulling the strings deciding that you go here or there. It is our own actions that determine this. So technically the point is, at the time of death, what happens at a certain point before you stop breathing, this process kicks in. And at some point in this process of this deconstruction of the components of the person, you start to deconstruct bits and pieces, stop ceasing, And at a certain point in that process, the karmic seeds, and we're going to go into this, that will determine your next life, your next mum or whatever, will be triggered right there. So it's literally, technically, extremely important moment. So, and then second, and why we need help at the time of death is because we have incredible attachment to me, this body, this life. Huge, they say primordially deep attachment, therefore huge fear. Most people die with fear, you know. It's technically how it is, because we have this massive attachment. And of course, the Buddhist view is we've died countless times, but we've buried our memory of it. You know, most of us don't remember even yesterday, but most of us don't even remember most of today. Forget about this life, forget about a previous life. You know, we can access all these memories eventually as we progress spiritually. But we've died thousands of times, countless lifetimes, the Buddha would say. So, you know, this fear is going to build in because we're so utterly attached to me, mine, my body, and cannot stand the thought of not being me. Really, it's as simple as that. So this is where I needed for your pussycat as well, you know, to help navigate, to help support the person, to alleviate their fear, to make them feel secure and comfortable. Why does that help? Because this is the essential point, and we're going to unpack all this over the weekend. This is a technical essential point. You want the person, or your pussycat, to be relaxed as possible and feeling as comfortable as possible, as fearless as possible, meaning feel secure, feeling supported. Why? Because then that will help trigger a virtuous karmic seed, which will give you at least another decent human rebirth. But if you die with fear, with panic, lots of agony and pain on your own, not knowing what to do, because most people don't prepare for death, then it's more than likely you'll be having all the fear and suffering will trigger a negative karmic seed, which will cause you to get a suffering rebirth. So this, you know, even the idea of karma and future lives is pretty abstract for us. You know, it doesn't, it's like sort of, you think, well, who cares, you know? Because we're so caught up in just this person now. So it really takes a while for, if you're not a Buddhist and you like it, it sort of seems like big deal. I remember talking about karma, and this is extensive, it's necessary. Utterly, this is the essence of what we're going to be discussing, the way karma works and how you can help encourage virtuous karmic seeds to be triggered, and how to live a life that will enable you to die well so that virtuous karmic seeds are triggered. I remember in a teaching detail about karma. And because I've been a Buddhist for a few years, I kind of, you know, I'm buying into the Buddhist view, so I try to take it seriously. He said, well, I don't really understand why I should think about karma. Who cares, you know? So it really takes a while to get our heads around it. Why to make it sounds sort of like sometimes freaked out. It sounds like extreme and sort of, who cares, you know? What does it matter? It's kind of interesting. But this is the Buddhist view. This is the way Lama Zopa is expressing, you know. So that means we have to understand there are different types of rebirths, the Buddha would say. It really is quite abstract for us, even if we're very devoted Buddhists. It certainly takes a while to have the direct experience of the truth of this. You've got to be quite advanced to have that, which means clairvoyance, which you can get if you have single-pointed concentration. You do this brilliant technique these genius Indians invented 3,000 years ago. It's a central technique in Buddhist practice, shamatha, calm abiding. One of the consequences of that is you access these more subtle levels of your mind, which have the capability of seeing the past and future. Then you can be confident, but that takes a while. So until then, we're taking it as our working hypothesis. But it's interesting as well, even if we have no particular view about what happens after death, somehow many of us are happy to hear there's something we can do. We want to do something, you know. Especially for our pussycats and dogs. Many people are so happy to hear there's practices you can do for your animals to help them die peacefully. Not to mention your mum, you know, or yourself. So it's divided into 5 parts, this book, and as I said, it's kind of like chronological, really. The first parts are more like part 1 is how to think about death and reincarnation. What happens after death? Everyone dies, so there's no need to be afraid. Death is easy when you've given up attachment. Get ready for death by living life with a good heart. Background stuff, you know. Part 2, and then how we go from one life to the next, like the technical explanations. What happens at death? Then the 12 links of dependent arising at the time of death, which is one of the Lord Buddha's teachings from the sutras about a certain process that has a particular role at the time of death. The stages of death, intermediate state and rebirth. Death is what the yogis have been waiting for. We'll discuss that. Then part 3. Now we have part 3 and 4 and 5 are this chronological process, practices to do in the months and weeks before death. So of course this is the ideal scenario. It's not so, many people in the modern world, and the materialists would say, I'd rather just die suddenly or die in my sleep. I don't want to know about it, because of course we think that there's nothing afterwards. And if that's true, then you're correct. Best to be taken by surprise. Knock me on the head, but I'm not looking. Thank you very much. Because we don't like the idea of moving towards death. That's the scariest thing for many people, knowing you're going to die. But that's not helpful for the Buddhists. It's far better. The Buddhist approach is far better to confront the fact that you're going to die and live your life in the framework of impermanence, which we're going to talk about, so that you can learn to be unafraid of it, knowing just to factor death into your life as a natural thing that will happen in this life, and then be ready for it. Just already mentally be ready for it, because you'll be unafraid because you know it's natural. And then having a practice, let's say, enabling you to navigate it as you go through, as you get sicker and weaker, and at the time you die, and so on and so forth. So that's the advice in the book. So the weeks and months before, what to do to help your loved one, and lots of practices, really, lots of things which he recommends. And because he recommends them at different stages, you can't keep putting the same practice in each chapter. So that's why all the practices are in the back, numbered. So what to do the months and weeks before? So, Rinpoche talks about helping others at the time of death is a big responsibility, and we'll talk about this tonight, create a conducive environment, and then lots and lots of practices. He suggests lots of things we can do to help, and all, of course, depending on the person. What to think about, what to hear, what to see and touch, what to meditate on, what to do to purify negative karma, what to do in the hours before death. And then part 4, practice to do in the hours and days after the breath has stopped. Because that's not death yet for the Buddha. Well, there's certainly the way it's described in the Vajrayana. It could be up to 3 days before after you stop breathing, before your consciousness actually leaves the body. So this is a crucial piece of information, actually, to try and factor in. The practice, so then all that section, once your breath has stopped, what to do as soon as the breath stops, then what to do if your loved one, because there are different scenarios, aren't there? What to do if your loved one dies at home, which is the ideal scenario, because you've got the space and time to run the show for 3 days. If you're in a hospital, you can't do that. What to do if your loved one dies in hospital? What to do if your loved one dies suddenly? What to do if your loved one gives their organs? What to do if your loved one is a meditator? Different scenarios, what to do at different scenarios, because then you look at which one applies to you and you try to follow the advice, And then part 5, the practice to do after the mind has left the body, which is when actual death is. Because they talk about, there's a tradition in the Tibetan tradition to do, it's good to do lots of different practices for the 49 days after the person dies. Because it's said that it's up to 49 days that the mind is in this intermediate state after they die, before they take rebirth. We'll discuss all this. And you can see, I think I just find this very interesting, actually. My own comment, that if you look, I was brought up a Catholic, right? And you listen to the different religious views. There's obviously humans over the centuries are always looking into the meaning of life. How amazing. And really, how dare we be so rude as to criticize different views? We all do that. We love to do that. We hate this one and that one and these idiots and those fools and blah, 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 But how marvelous that human beings are looking into the meaning of life. And it seems to me, from the religious philosophical point of view, there are many similarities, and I would put it this way, observations. Of course, materialists think that religious people just make it all up. I think that materialists think religious people are the wackiest people on the planet who make up things. They think that, what to do. So many, it seems like, one time in Melbourne, where I'm from, Australia, I think it's in Melbourne, Texas, isn't it? It's Melbourne. You call it probably Melbourne, right? We swallow our words. It's Melbourne. I'm Robina, not Robina. Americans call me Robina. I'm Robina. It's Melbourne. So in Melbourne, I was brought up there, and I was a Catholic. So I'm a Catholic friend there's this university, Catholic university, and they asked me to give a talk at a conference, and I had a little 20-minute slot. A little Buddhist, you know, it was a Catholic conference, whatever. So I didn't know what to talk about, and I got there that morning and still didn't know what to talk about. So I looked up the dictionary for the definition of God, and it said 3 essential qualities: infinite wisdom, infinite compassion, infinite power. I thought, well, that's interesting. They're the 3 qualities of a Buddha as well. So that means different people in different times, at different cultures, have observed similar things, have come up with similar findings, radically different. Other findings, completely different. I mean, my goodness. So my 20-minute talk was the similarities between the definition of God and Buddha. I don't know if the Catholics liked it or not, but that was what it was, you know. That was what I could talk about. So there's so many things. And of course, there's so many views that are so weird. I mean, Australian Aboriginal views of the universe are so abstract, I don't understand them. I read the words dream time, I do not understand. Because they stayed there isolated for so many years, you know, coming up with their view of the universe. It's so abstract, so unusual. So, I mean, well done to human beings. Great, we should have respect for all of them, you know. So this idea, you know, when you're a Catholic, when you died, you went to limbo. No, you wait a minute, you went to 2 different ones. If you weren't baptized, you went to limbo, wasn't it? And you're in limbo, you never get out, and you're stuck because you didn't get baptized, you know, poor thing. But if you're an ordinary person and you're a bit naughty, you go to purgatory, where you clean up some sins, and then you go to heaven, isn't it? Well, this intermediate state seems to me, from the yogi's point of view, they're observing a similar thing. Do you understand? Because it's between rebirths. Of course, the Christians don't talk about it rebirth, but technically it's a rebirth. You get reborn, but they've only got 2 options, hell or heaven, isn't it? Buddhism's got more, you know, they've observed more options. Animals, spirits, which is a bit, you know, different things, different observations about rebirth. Anyway, so that's the book, you know. So then that's the information in here. So it's really interesting. Anybody who thinks about the Buddhist view, wants to know what goes on, this is extremely helpful information, I tell you. And of course, you're going to find in the Tibetan tradition, different traditions. The Kargyupas are taught one way, the Gelugpas are taught another. Well, this is from the Gelugpa point of view, which is the tradition of this center and the tradition of my teachers. So we share, you know, our lamas go to the different Gelugpa monasteries. So one of the things Rinpoche the first thing he talks about is the role of the helpers, you know. And for example, he says, I'll quote you sometimes what he says. A big responsibility. '63. He says, you know, we've a good rebirth, and this means what they call a perfect human rebirth, in a Buddhist pure land. I'm going to talk about the pure lands. I thought pure lands were totally boring. I had no interest in pure lands. The idea of a boring old pure land. But since doing this book, I'm quite attached to the idea of being reborn in Amitabha's Pure Land. So I'll describe to you what that means. It depends upon dying peacefully. This is the bottom line. This is the essence of all the advice in this book, is to help the person, the mouse, the bird, your pussycat, be peaceful. Because when the mind is peaceful, unafraid, unfreaking out, the mind can be virtuous. In other words, virtue is when the mind is loving, kind, relaxed, content. The mind is calmer and more relaxed. When the mind's peaceful, it can be virtuous. If you're freaking out and agitated, you can't be loving and kind because you can't get past your own nose, you know, you're panicking. That's the worst way to die. This is the bottom line. This is the basis of all the advice in this book, is how to always find the most conducive condition for your loved one, you know. Including the pussycat or the ant or the moth you find, whoever it is, the ant, the dog, the cockroach, whatever, same thing. So therefore, people surrounding the person who's dying, friends, family, professional caregivers, have a big responsibility. You know, I'll put it this way: whatever arises in your loved one's mind, whether their thoughts are virtuous or non-virtuous, very much depends upon you and other helpers and how you behave towards them. It's a great responsibility. If you're not careful, if you do not have this education that the way you behave affects the mind of the person and therefore their future life, you will only harm them, not help them. So one of the things he talks about, one of the chapters is that to make the place really conducive. So from this perspective, you could say, and there's all due respect to kind nurses and doctors in hospitals, it's probably about the worst place to die if you want to have a peaceful environment. I mean, nurses and doctors are so kind, but hospitals are these noisy places. Unless you're rich, you've got your own private room and you can lock the door, you know, it's so stressful. And this is a key point about when we're dying. As you're getting, I mean, even as you're getting older, before you're even labeled dying, your mind becomes weaker. Your mind becomes more fragile. You become more sensitive to energies all around. This has got a lot to do with understanding this way of dividing mind into gross, subtle, and very subtle. So maybe I'll talk about that for a second now. You know, subtle mind, we only, when you want, what's interesting is the sleep, the process we go through when we sleep, have dreams and wake up is the same process physiologically, according to the Vajrayana point of view, as death. This is gradual deconstruction of your components. Your sensory consciousness ceases first, then your physical elements cease, then you go to sleep. Like if you tap a person when they've gone to sleep, they can't feel it. Their sensory consciousness is absorbed. Then you have your subtle mind prevails now, and you dream. Well, your dream mind is the more subtle level of your mind. So as you're dying, when you're getting sick or even getting older and dying, it's like you're moving away from your grosser consciousness, more towards your subtle consciousness, and you become incredibly sensitive. Especially if you're dying and sick, you're incredibly sensitive to the slightest noise. Meditators, for example, when you learn to meditate, you're learning literally to go to a more subtle level of mind. It's a similar process. So I remember interviewing Venerable Renee, one of our monks who's been a professional meditator, I mean a serious meditator for 40 years. I interviewed him years ago in our magazine about one of his long retreats. Because in concentration meditation, shamatha, that's exactly what's happening. As you go through the stages of concentration, you get to them, you're beginning to touch a more subtler level. It's a bit different in the Vajrayana model where they describe. And you said you become incredibly sensitive to the slightest shift in the wind even. Unless you're a very stable meditator, you can't do much, you know, your mind's so sensitive. So sick people, old people, sick, dying people, so sensitive to the slightest noise. So for example, in the room, one of the things would be to have the room where the person's dying to be very peaceful, very beautiful. Only allow people in there, if you're the one who's in control, who are going to be help the person be calm, you know. Like if there's, you know, you let people in, let the pets in, have music on, and everybody comes in and out and blah, blah, blah. This isn't where we have to have an understanding of what attachment is. We don't have this view in our culture, not at all, about attachments. Buddha's very specific view. So because attachment is so fierce at the time of death, it just naturally, primordially is there. Attachment to not dying, attachment to not being yourself, attachment to disappearing, basically. It's so primordial. So if all your cats and your dogs and your beloveds are all around, people always talk about, you have to help her let go. That's literally what it is. You know, you'll stay on, you'll live and live and live as there's not anything there. Attachment needs something to hold on to. So you've got your pussycat and your dog and your people, then you've got to grasp at everybody. You know, or if there are people in the room who you don't like, for example, that will just be so distressing for your mind. Or even there's a person in that room whom you're really attached to, it can freak you out. So you can't be like a policeman to the dying person, but you've got to know their mind well. If you're the one in charge, know who can be allowed to be into the room. The room should be really peaceful. It should be very beautiful. I mean, sick rooms are often awful, busy, cluttered. Should be light space. If a person's lying in there every day, you know, it should be so peaceful with lovely views, quiet, no troublemakers in the room, no pets. That's very shocking because we have we think we love our pets, we do, but we're so attached to them, and that attachment can only be distressing at the time of death. There's a friend of mine who really likes this idea and wants to do this kind of work, and she's doing it with her mother at the moment. And she sent me a photo of her mum, you know, in the room. The room is completely calm. Her mum was quiet in the bed. The bed was in a certain direction so you could see, and the curtains were open, and there was the sky and like and some lovely view outside. Just when you're waking in and out of sleep, just look up. It's spacious for your mind. The mind should be spacious, and having space and clarity and cleanness is really helpful for a person who's sick. Of course, if you're unconscious all the time, maybe it doesn't matter. But the room looked just so nice, so peaceful. And she didn't have to turn her head around to look at it. The bed was put in such a way, she just opened her eyes. There it was, The room should be so nice. Because we've got senses, and we receive everything through our senses. I remember one course we were doing, the book, and one woman was telling us that she'd took turns with their friends, helping their friend die, taking turn to be in there, and she was a fan of Patsy Cline, so they always had Patsy Cline music on, and the pussycat was there, and the doggy was there, and the people walking in and out and chatting and friendly and laughing, and all seemed to be fun and having a lovely time. And she heard about these ideas, and so she was on her roster, she turned off Patsy Cline, chucked out the dogs and the cats, and everything to be peaceful, quiet. Because if there's lots of things happening, attachment grasps onto it. That's attachment's job. Look at children when they're uncontrolled. Whatever, like little birds grasping at anything, because attachment energy's gone berserk, So if it's quiet, there's nothing, you can calm the attachment. There's nothing for the attachment to grasp onto. I remember one day in California, I haven't spent much time with people who died, except my sister recently. I'll tell you about that. There's two women I went to visit on one day. It was very interesting, the difference. One was this old lady, she was a Zen practitioner with her old Zen husband. He was deaf and she was blind, or he was blind and she was deaf. I don't know what, but they were blissfully happy. They were this wonderful couple, And I think the husband was blind. I can't remember, but she was dying. She's on the bed and she just looked radiant. They were just it was just such very sweet. You could see she had no fear, She was kind of relaxed, ready, unafraid. Husband was loving, took care of her. The other house, this other lady knew something about Buddhism, and I think she liked Lama Yeshe or something. This is my Lama. And I remember, she was stressed out, fretting and clinging to the sheets, and she had cancer. Didn't know, in other words, didn't know what to think. That's what it's all about. You don't know what to think. You don't know what to do. You don't know what to do. And it's so final, death, So she knows she's dying. Can't look forward to getting better. So like a lot of people, like a lot of places, and old people's places are so depressing, have the television on all day, loud. Oh, good, it's distracting them, they say, Well, then the television on all day, her attachment is just grasping at it, all the time grasping at it, because you're desperate for something to hold on to. So anyway, I remember she liked Lama Yeshe, and was the days when you had not a DVD, the ones before DVD, what were they called?
VCR.
When you had a tape. You put it in, oh. you put, that's right, exactly that one. So I had one of Lama Yeshe and I gave it to them to put in the television. Well, I heard later the television broke. So they couldn't play that. So she died in an hour. So in other words, her attachment calmed down because there's nothing to hold on to. It doesn't mean you want them to die. It's not a question of that. It's a question of seeing the benefit of allowing their mind, which can be to be peaceful. And you can't tell them, be peaceful. Make the environment peaceful for them. Keep the troublemakers out. Keep the noise out. Do not, as Lama Zopa says, the only sounds. Okay, he's talking about Buddhists. As a Christian, the same, is the sound of mantra, the sound of prayers, because that sound can help their mind, That's the Buddhist view. So, of course, if your grandma's a communist, you don't want to, play. I mean, you could. She mustn't have to know that, because people like mantras. People just think it's nice music, They don't think you're trying to convert them. So maybe that could help. Certainly with your animals, it's just the same with your animals. Poor little, there's so much fear animals have, especially if you find a little bird, it's just terrified. So put it in a little box where it's completely secure and have it having mantras playing quietly, can help its little mind. We'll discuss that more in detail. So that can create a conducive environment. And that means peaceful, clean, pleasing, especially when they're still conscious, coming in and out of sleep, old, dying, like this room of my friend. I can see it in my mind now. It was so beautiful the way she did it. So for her old mum, so calming, just so calming. When your mind is calm, virtuous karmic seeds can be triggered. So any questions so far? I'm just chatting away here, so you know, any questions so far? We're going to go into more detail all over the weekend, of course. But are there any questions so far? Particularly on what I just said. But we're going to go into more details, of course. Nothing there?
Hello, Venerable Robina. It's Kimberly. How are you?
Hello, sweetheart. Talk to me.
I'm curious about animals. If they're suffering terribly, is it better to let them die naturally or euthanasia so they stop suffering?
Exactly, I understand this. So, I mean, it's certainly going to be coming up in the weekend, but now that you've brought it up, this will be what that can go into, this can help us go into this discussion. Absolutely. Okay. Well, there's two things. There's two players involved here. There's the karma of two different people. One, the person, the animal or the human who's dying, and oneself. So there's two things. And I think to really understand this in more detail, we have to go into karma. Maybe that's the time to do it. Why not? So, okay. In general, the Buddhist approach is, the Buddhist idea is that every millisecond of whatever we think and do and say, every millisecond is, it's putting it simply, is the process that creates oneself. We are literally, as Dalai Lama said one time, karma is like self-creation. This takes a while to hear because we don't think like this, you know. We are the creators of ourselves moment by moment. So the way I like to explain this, and it's really true, we do understand this when it comes to being a cook, a carpenter, a musician, any of our skills that we learn. We don't use these words, but we can see it's literally true. Every millisecond of what you do with your mind and your body and speech, if you are learning music, is the process that produces the musician. Please hear my words. You wouldn't say, oh, well, I'm allowed to think what I like when it comes to music, and you're trying to play Bach. No, you're not. You won't be able to play Bach. You'll just play gobbledygook. Try and hear my point. We know that what goes on in your mind is absolutely vital. It's called learning the theories. You happily learn Bach's theories. You don't just rave on, well, I'll think this about music and I'll think about that about music. You know that everything that goes on in your mind and then everything you do with your body and indeed your speech is the process that produces the mathematician, the musician, the cook. We know this, we just don't speak it like that. Well, but when it comes to our becoming a happy or suffering person, that's a different kettle of fish for us. We don't think our mind plays any role at all. This is so shocking, I can't believe it. But Lama Zopa said one time, and I think it's true, the vast majority of all humans on the planet have no idea that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all in their lives when it comes to happiness and suffering. Musician, yes. Mathematician, making money, all the things we learn and do. Our mind is vital. It is the main player. We know it. But not when it comes to happiness and suffering. It's very bizarre if you think about it. Why? Because we think we're this innocent victim who didn't ask to get born. We got plonked on this planet with a brain that where wacky things go on. I don't know, nothing to do with me. I didn't ask to get born. It's not my fault. And then weird, wacky things happen. As long as we keep them all secret and no one sees them, we think we'll get away with it. It won't matter. We have these wacky ideas, you know, if we compare with the Buddhist view. I put it this way. And because we think the outside world is the main player in terms of our being a happy person, suffering person. Buddha says the exact opposite. In the same way that you produce a musician, well, honey child, you produce a happy person or a suffering person. That's it. This is the meaning of karma, really, that we produce ourselves. So that means every millisecond what we think and do and say is vitally important to produce the person you want to become. You have to learn to be in control of it. In other words, so rather than just a victim of what goes on, you know. So that's really a way of putting what karma is. We think of it as just another version of punishment and reward. It's so silly. There's no one punishing, there's no one rewarding. There's no view like that in Buddhism. We are the boss. It takes a while to hear this. It's quite shocking. So that, in other words, and it's all framed in terms of happiness and suffering. All the type of rebirth Buddha talks about, all the experiences we have in our daily life, you think about it. We want to be happy and we do not want to suffer. And if you think about it, that wish drives all our decisions. And Buddha says we can learn to produce a happy person and stop suffering. That's his deal, that's his trip, that's Buddhism. So, okay, if every millisecond of what you think, do, and say produces the person you become, and we're not just talking this life, and then secondly, there's nothing that goes astray. This is the point too. Every millisecond of what you think, do, and say, and Buddha uses this analogy, sows seeds in your mind. And seeds, when they're given, the right conditions come together, will ripen as what? Suffering experiences, happy experiences. So there's your auntie, you're helping her die. There's your pussycat, helping the pussycat die. They are carrying with them, and if we've had countless past lives, which Buddha says we have, you go back to previous life, and the previous life, and the previous life. Well, of course, we all want a first one. When did I begin? This is a discussion in itself, The Buddha is basically saying that matter and minds, which are the components of the universe, are beginningless. You can't have a first moment. Big Bang, I remember in discussions with scientists, Big Bang, he said, no problem, just not the first Big Bang, that's all. So there's this weird idea that, it was shocking when we hear it, that our mind is beginningless and matter is beginningless. You can't have a first Big Bang. There's going to be universes before universes before universes and so on. And this is the Buddha's view. Whatever. So we've got countless past lives. We've got countless karmic imprints in our mind, countless karmic seeds in our little bank vaults, speaking simply, So the time of death, like I said, the way you die, peacefully, virtuously, happily, unhappily, freaked out, whatever, determines which of the karmic seeds in your bank vault is triggered. A happy mind, there's space for a virtuous karmic seed to be triggered. When the mind is freaked out, it's space in the mind. There's no space in the mind, so that'll be a catalyst for a negative seed to be triggered, because we've done lots of negative actions, so we could put negative seeds, and they're going to ripen as suffering experiences. No one punishes us, no one rewards us, there's no punisher and there's no rewarder in Buddhism. We're doing, it's self-creation. The best way to put it, as Dalai Lama said. It's a curious concept, it takes a while to hear it. So given that there are these billions of karmic seeds in our mind, and that we would like for our pussycat a virtuous karmic seed to be triggered at the time she is dying, would like that, then should I kill her or should I not? Well, the simple question is, am I certain that if I intervene at this moment, can I be certain that when I kill her, her mind will be peaceful and it will trigger a virtuous karmic seed, and that she will be reborn as a nice human being with a nice mummy and meet the Dalai Lama and have a spiritual path? Well, of course I can't be certain, I'm not clairvoyant. So the answer to the question is you don't play Russian roulette with your pussycat. That's the simple answer. It's not a punitive thing, it's not moralistic, it's not like, oh, you shouldn't kill. If you've got enough wisdom, you're a powerfully realized being, and you have enough wisdom and compassion to see that it's absolutely the perfect time for me to die now, please kill me. I'll be delighted, I trust your wisdom. Because you've got confidence, you know what you're doing. But even then you wouldn't, So, but the thing, of course, your question, Tiffany, was if she's suffering, the cat's suffering, that's the big one for us. That's what freaks us out. Well, I think it's really important to factor in our own fears. And I think so often our own fears completely dominate these decisions, our own fears. And I think, and this is a big point with humans as well, I think we don't distinguish between mental anguish and physical pain. We assume if there's physical pain, the person will be freaked out. Not true. And that's the role of helpers, including for your pussycat. Like I say, especially your dog utterly adores you. Your dog lives for you. Your dog relies on you 1,000,000%. If you've got your little doggy and your doggy's suffering physically, but your dog's peaceful, she's surrounded by you, she's hearing the mantras, and this is an whole other discussion, the benefit of all this, then you can say that she will be peaceful. We have so much intellectual rabbiting on in our heads, we make ourselves suffer much worse, Even your loved one who's got physical pain, if you're present, I mean, okay, you know yourself when you've got some sickness or some problems, the first thing you do is you find someone to rely upon. You feel, you ring your friend, you call for your friend, and straight away it makes you feel better. You feel safe, you feel supported. That's calming your mind down. You can't medicate mental pain. You can medicate physical pain, but you can be so supportive of a person mentally, including your pussycat. So the answer is, because you're not qualified to be certain that your pussycat will take a positive rebirth, then you don't play Russian roulette. That's the logic behind it. What do you think, darling?
That's wonderful. Thank you very much.
And the thing is, the Buddhist approach is so much you can do. And we're going to go into this to help your pussycat. There's so
Yes,
much.
my
so
female
much we can do.
pussycat loves to sit with me while I do Om Tara Tutare. She
There you go.
loves
That's
it.
right. Exactly, Kimberly. That's exactly
Loves it.
right.
Thank you so much.
Exactly right, darling. Exactly. What do you think, people? Any questions about that? Because it's a huge one. I mean, almost everybody in this room, I bet you have killed your pet. Don't want to make you feel guilty or anything. Because we don't say kill, we say put her down, or all these polite words, isn't it? But just being straightforward about it. Yes.
I think some of the nicest, best veterinarians know to give the animal a shot or maybe some gas to just relax them before they actually administer the shot that stops their heart. And I think that's beautiful. I had to put down a glorious hen the other day that my family just adored. And she was paralyzed and barely breathing. And the veterinarian that I took her to, as with a referral from my friend who knew him and I didn't, he was able to massage her in such a way that she actually picked her head up and looked around. She hadn't had her head up before that. And he said, she's almost gone. She's barely breathing. She's paralyzed back here. But the best way to handle this is for us to give her a little gas and just get her completely relaxed and sleepy.
Yeah, I understand.
And I thought it was so sweet.
I understand.
He said, we don't give birds shots right off the bat like we would a dog or something because it's too hard on their system. And I was like, oh.
I know, so sweet. But this is the point, the added point I'm making here, which is, what you're saying is, I can't argue with it. But the Buddhist approach is, you would try not to you do all of those things, but not cause their death. You'd allow them, you do all of that, as well as playing prayers and making them feel safe. Not because you want them to suffer, but because you're not, this is the point. I mean, your vet is not a Buddhist, so of course you see my point. If you had this view, you would try to do all of that, take care, loving, and have prayers, and not allow the pussycat and the dog to die in their own pace. That's all. That's not because you want them to suffer. It's not it's because you're not confident.
You don't want to interject something into natural.
No, it's because you don't know. You see, the whole point we're discussing here is the concept of karma. That is, if that's not your view, then it sounds ridiculous. Because minute by second, there are millions of karmic seeds in that animal's mind. And we want this is the Buddhist view. I keep having to say that. We want a virtuous karmic seed to be triggered in this process of death, which we're going to discuss tomorrow. So that when they do die, they will then, when they pass, they'll get then reborn as a human being. That's the point. So we can't be certain even then it'll happen, but we try to do as much as we can. That's all. The bottom line is to try to do as much as we can to not intervene, but not intervene to cause the death, but we can intervene to be as kind and comfortable as possible. That's all I can try. That's all I can say. It's ideal, and you still can't guarantee. That's all. But yes, it sounds what you're saying is. I'm sorry, microphone. Thank you. Yes. Anybody else? Yes, darling.
I have a situation with a dog that is extremely fearful. He's got something.
His poor head, he's a bit crazy. Yeah.
With aggression.
Yes, right.
And he's attacked me.
Yes, I understand. He's kind of paranoid, the poor thing.
Right now I have
wow.
wounds.
Poor doggy.
Ago, but,
yes.
and his quality of life is nil.
He's still alive,
Yeah, he's a young, healthy, physically healthy dog.
but his mind is
His
whacked.
mind is whacked.
Yeah, he's probably
And
see. I mean, this
it's
is.
dangerous.
I know the Buddhist view. See, the Buddhist view. He's probably seeing. I mean, this is another whole discussion. He seems like he's got spirits interfering. You know, in Buddhist view, there's all these different beings, and some are really harmful. If you're Christian, you'd call it the devil, but you know they call them spirits, and they're subtle beings, and you can't see them. But some animals can be very sensitive to them. It sounds like he's being disturbed by spirits. There's all sorts of things you can do, like playing mantras and prayers can be very powerful. Have you got any of these Buddhist things? Do you know Christopher? Have you been here before?
Yes.
Okay. Are you doing that? Playing mantras for him? You can't do better than that for
I
him.
can't be around him. He's too dangerous.
No, but where does he live?
In my backyard.
He's on the yard on his own.
Yes.
Wow. You can't.
It's very sad. I mean,
But you can't. But you can play mantras. You can put something in. But you can play mantras, darling.
Behavioral euthanasia.
But you can play mantras for him. Are you doing that or not?
I'm not. I mean,
What do you think about that idea? Have you thought of it? Like if you can record medicine Buddha mantras, this is something I want to talk about more, because especially when you're crazy, the poor suffering being, I mean, you drug him out so he can calm down a bit?
I have tried drugs and they didn't help.
No, I understand. I think, why don't you try does Christopher, do you know where she lives and everything?
I live near here.
Well, why can't you help her, Christopher? How come you haven't suggested this before?
I haven't heard that story.
Sorry, what? Oh, first time you've heard it. You should consult Christopher. He's your Buddhist consultant here.
Well, I've been considering behavioral euthanasia.
No, of course you are.
He's attacking me. And
I know that, darling.
Attacks other animals.
I understand
I'm
that.
very fearful to do that.
I know
because of
that,
everything
but
you've
this is,
told me.
please talk to Christopher later. Record, there's like on YouTube, there's Lama Zopa singing Medicine Buddha, so beautiful. Just get it playing continuously, have it quiet. You don't know, sometimes it can be miraculous, the benefit. I'm really serious. And there's all kinds, but that particularly, I mean, there's one.
I mean, I'll have to play it through the open window. because
No, you just have it
I can't
near
hear
him. No,
you.
look, just have a little speaker near him.
Yeah.
Quietly playing. I mean it. 24 hours a day I'm talking. There's nothing else that can help him, sweetheart. Do you understand?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so suffering, the poor darling.
I have not thought of that.
No, I mean, it seems like spirits. He's completely being possessed by spirits, harmed by beings, spirits.
It really does seem that way.
Seems like it. That's what it is. He's imagining things, poor darling. So much suffering. Christopher, you help her.
Medicine Buddha, yeah.
Medicine would be incredible. YouTube and Lama Zopa used to repeat, there's a 40-minute one, he just put on continuous. It's very powerful in his voice. I mean, let me talk about this a bit. We'll discuss this for sure. I mean, of course, if you're not Buddhist, not religious, you might just think it's ridiculous. But even if it's just, because it's okay. You see, this is what's interesting. We know this, actually. We have lots of people who have experiences. We've got these different senses, okay? And the eyes are like the grossest one, I think. Conscious, the different sensory consciousnesses, but ear conscious is much more subtle. So people in dreams, I mean, people you can have vivid experiences in your mental consciousness when you're dreaming, or like a coma, and you can see and hear things. So I know, for example, I visited a friend in Sydney in a hospital in the ER, who was totally zonked out she was in a coma. They said she wouldn't even come out. And I remember she wasn't really a Buddhist, but she had some Buddhist lamas, she had some lamas she was very close to. So I'd asked their students to pray for Judy. And I went to visit her. It was a long way from where I was living, and I had to go drive at night. So I drove at night because you could drive fast, right? Because you get there quicker. It's about 40 minutes. Anyway, whatever. But I visited about midnight, and her husband rang up and said, "Can I come and visit her? Because I'm I'm a Buddhist, and I'm her spiritual mentor or something." And when I got there, they said, "Oh, please don't play any bells. Don't ring any bells." So I promised I wouldn't ring any bells. Anyway, I sat there and just said prayers in Judy's ear, And then what was interesting, I knew, anyway, I'd come every night, say these different prayers. Every now and again, I'd say, whisper loudly in her ear, "Judy, Tsomsa Kensei Rinpoche is praying for you. Judy, His Holiness Sakya Trinzen is praying for you." So anyway, weeks later, she came out of her coma, all bright and perky, totally normal. And she said to me, she told me, she didn't know it was me. She said the only thing she could remember from that whole experience, weeks and weeks, was this voice. She said it was a husky voice. She thought it was a blue lady coming through the window saying exactly those words. And you hear this, so this is the subtle mind, you see? This is your subtle mind. She was totally unconscious. I know there's people who have experiences, you know, you call it lucid dreaming. One time doing a retreat, when I first became a nun, I mean, I'm not a meditator, but I was doing a 3-month retreat, Vajrasattva retreat, 12 hours a day, so something has to happen, you know? I mean, you worked hard. So I know vividly, for a couple of weeks, we'd have our nap at lunchtime, because it's the rainy season in Dharamsala. We'd have our nap. And I had these crystal clear dreams during lunchtime. Crystal clear, like a real life. But I was fast asleep. But I remembered, I didn't see what was going on around me, but I heard everything. I heard all the talking in the kitchen, what was going on, the birds, the rain, but I was asleep, having dreams simultaneously. Subtle mind is way more powerful. And that's when you have coma or in a sleep, coma or dreaming, or when you get sicker or older. But also because these mantras are invoking the Buddhas, the enlightened beings, right? And something like, you know, people who are crazy can be instantaneously calming sometimes, instantaneously, because it's related to the Buddhas, you know. I mean, your poor darling dog, the nightmare for the poor dog must be unbearable, living in her poor little head, you know. Unbearable, your poor dog.
He's miserable.
Unbearable. See what you can do, Christopher, to help.
Thank you.
Wow, that's so sad. What else?
Yeah. We've
Yeah.
got some questions
Good
from Zoom.
Good, Kavita, talk to me.
Christine, do you want to ask your question, or do you want me to? There was a question about do not resuscitate requests for humans.
Yeah.
And what's the thinking there? Someone on life support,
I understand.
or has a,
I
yeah,
understand. It's really a dilemma, isn't it? We've created for ourselves now. We've got the means to keep people alive for 100 years. So we're kind of forcing ourselves to kill people. It's so bizarre. We're so ridiculous with our cleverness, isn't it? So it's yeah, I mean, it's really sensible. It's really sensible to take, you know, to take a person, to not keep them alive forcefully. It's sensible. It makes complete sense. I remember in Santa Cruz years ago, a friend of mine, her father and her mummy were both Buddhists, and the daddy had a really bad heart, and he got his wife to promise that if he had a heart attack, not to call anybody, just let him die, you know, because he was so fragile. So she forgot, of course. He collapsed and she panicked and rang the ambulance. So once he's in the hospital system, you can't get him out of it. You can't sneak him away again, you know. So anyway, we went to the hospital in the early morning. You could tell he was, he did not want all this. He didn't want to be kept alive. He didn't want that. So we did all the prayers that he wanted us to do, and then they pulled the plug. Yeah, I mean, that's really sensible. It's a sensible thing, because it's you see, that as part of the problem, isn't it, in our culture, the default mode is death is somehow, the default view is death is a mistake. It's a medical mistake. Everything's to keep people alive, isn't it? But it's just kind of irrational, you know, and as a result of that, we create these dilemmas for ourselves. More and more these days. I mean, I find it very moving more and more these days. I remember years ago in Australia, I did a conference. I talked at a conference, and it was young people electing to work among the dying. I was very moved by that. Nurses and doctors. It was very moving, actually. People choosing to help people in this way. So I think it's just sensible. Of course, the Buddhist view is totally that. You know, if you can keep a person alive, marvelous, do your best, but not to be irrational about it. And then this is the point. This is the point. When you do decide to pull the plug, you create the condition the best possible. You'd have, you know, if it's like, say, you'd call Courtin monastery and have them do pujas right at that time, because you know exactly when you're going to pull the plug. You'd be there saying prayers on their bedside. You'd make it as good as possible, you know, for the person when they died. That's what happened to my sister. There were 7 of us in our family. We'd always say to each other, one is going to die first. So it was our oldest sister, Jan. She's a year older than me. And she was walking down the stairs to help her senile husband, who was at the bottom of the stairs. She had a cup of tea in one hand and a bag of vegetables in the other, about to meet one of my other sisters who's coming to whatever. And she tripped on the last couple of stairs, it seemed like, and fell on her head, you know, just fell, destroyed her brain. My sister found her. So she was brain dead, and it's like all my sisters have given up being, we're all brought up Catholic, but they're not Catholic anymore. So that, you know, they didn't want to But I was coming to Australia anyway, it's in September. And luckily Qantas kindly got me there earlier. And I just said, please keep her breathing. This is an interesting point. Please keep her breathing until I get there. Because you see, because her mind was, now this is the Buddhist view, that even though, we're going to discuss the process, even though she was brain dead, as far as they're concerned, she is dead. But the Buddhist view is, as long as if you can breathe, as Lama Zopa talks about this in the chapter, what if your loved one wants to give their organs? It's very interesting. He says, if, this Buddhist perspective, if you can breathe, even if it's artificial, and you are warm and toasty, that means your mind is there, but your subtle mind, your sensory consciousness has ceased, isn't it? That's for sure. But the subtle level of her consciousness is still there. So then as far as my sister's was concerned, she's dead. I said, yeah, I know she's dead. She's dead, Judy kept saying. I said, I know she's dead, darling, but do you mind just humouring me and let me come home and do some prayers for her, So they kind of humoured me, It was rather funny at the hospital because there's me. So, okay, to finish my first point, because her mind was still in her body, there was opportunity to help her. Still, but I had the Dalai Lama praying, I had Lama Zopa praying, all the people at Courtin were doing prayers. I mean, the Buddhist view is all this can really help a person and help shift the karma. Maybe she died freaked out. Maybe at the time she stopped breathing, which is when the karmic seed is triggered to determine your next life, because she would have died with fear. She was falling down the stairs. You're not like relaxed. Oh, I'm falling down the stairs. What fun. You're panicking, right? So, and that can be that at that time is when the karmic seed is triggered. So it might have been a negative one. Maybe she was angry because she usually got annoyed with the husband because the poor man's senile. Sometimes she'd get mad at him and she'd often get upset because she was angry, herself. She'd be upset with herself. So I thought I'm so glad to keep her breathing, have all these prayers. This can help shift the karma. And that's where you can help people a lot. The Buddhist view is, while if they're still not dead yet, they're still in the bed and they die, or even if their mind has ceased altogether, even if their breathing has stopped, their mind can still be in the body for up to 3 days. But as long as she's kept breathing, they could have kept her breathing for months. She would have still been in her body. You can't possibly leave the body if you're still breathing. You see my point? Are you following me, my thinking? So I was so happy that I could at least get there and do the prayers and have the prayers done before they pulled the plug. And so when we were there, so they gave me a chance. My sisters all had talked to her and had her in the hospital, and I was there with her and doing my prayers, and all my sisters and my brother were around, because my sister Jan was a fanatic Sydney Swans football fan, right? Obsessive football in Australia. This Australian rules football, totally unique to Australia. Obsessive. I mean, well, you know what it's like, all sports, isn't it? She was obsessed since she was 4 years old. She wrote her memoir, My Love Affair with the Sydney Swans, She wore red and white, their colours. So my sisters had the red and white, scarf on her body in the hospital, and they all, before they pulled the plug, they all sang the Sydney Swans football song. And there's me trying to do Buddhist things, and trying not to be too bossy about it. And at one point I had to say, can we please have some quiet here? Because they were chatting and laughing, You understand? It was rather funny. And I was trying to be too holy. I tried to sneak up to Jan close in her ear, Anyway, finally we pulled the plugs. And then I sat with her for a few hours. And then I had to go, and the nurse, who was Sri Lankan, I think, she was Buddhist, and she said she promised that they wouldn't disturb the body and they would keep her very gently and take her to the fridge, because they had to do an autopsy. And that's a good thing you can do. We'll discuss this. You can, if you can't leave the body in the hospital for 3 days in the hospital bed, you can get them to put it in the fridge, and then you can do prayers and practices for those 3 days while they're in the fridge. Do you understand? Anyway. So whatever that question was, I think I answered it. I'm not sure. What else, people? Questions about what I've discussed so far?
There's a question about whether or not animals are reborn quickly or quicker than humans.
Yeah, that's a good point. No, that's a good point. It's fairly likely if, say, ordinary animals who don't have mummies like us who take care of them and love them and look after them and nurture them and have them, if the regular animals in the wild who are living in fear all the time, it's very likely they don't take long to get reborn, and mostly would take reborn another suffering rebirth. That's right. If you're going to have a suffering rebirth, like a lower realm rebirth, like, they talk about hell rebirth, spirit rebirth, animal rebirth, it'd be pretty much, there's no mucking around. There's no wasting, there's no kind of hanging around. Whereas it's harder to find a human womb, even though there's 7 billion of us, it's a much harder rebirth to get, Yeah, I'd say so. What else, people? What time is it? 8:20. What time are we finishing? 9. Okay. So, okay, the general points I'm trying to make, okay. The Buddhist view, the Vajrayana view, well, no, the Buddhist view about karma is what underpins all of these views, that we've come into this life from the past, we've created the cause to have this human birth, and then what we do in this human birth, I mean, it's not the karmic things that you do in this rebirth necessarily are the ones that ripen at the time of your death. It could be a seed from 1,000 lifetimes ago that is the one that's triggered at the time of your death, because we've got millions of seeds there. But the key thing is at the time of death to make the environment peaceful for the person, the pussycat or the human. But there's the other approach, which is the classic one in the sutra teachings. If you've read the Lamrim teachings, the very first level, entry level, grade 1 teaching of the Buddha is to learn about impermanence and death. So why should we do that? Well, guess what? Because that's reality. You see, one approach to all of Buddha's teachings, of course, is that it's his view. Buddhism, the Buddhist views are coming from the Buddha's observation, and anybody who has practiced the Buddha's view and become a Buddha also, like the Buddha, it's that view is the reality. So the first thing and he's saying that one way of approaching all the Buddhist approach is that we suffer because we have these misconceptions in our mind and these emotional afflictions that cause us to go up garden paths, causes so much suffering, but also there's misconceptions about reality. So one of the most primordial misconceptions we have, instinctively, primordially, no one taught us, is that things kind of are permanent, things aren't changing. We know things change every second. We know things change, and we know in particular that we're going to die. We know it, but we can't bear the thought of it. So we literally live in denial. And even though impermanence is fairly easy to prove intellectually, we can all prove it. We know, we'd be embarrassed to say, oh no, I'm not going to really die. It's, no way. We know it's not true. We know we will die, but we don't believe we will die. This is one of the most primordial mistakes we have. We deeply grasp, as Lama Zopa puts it, we grasp at permanent me. So one approach to this is really the most profound way to prepare for your death is to live your life in the framework of practicing becoming familiar with the fact of your impermanence, and not just the impermanence of death, but impermanence of everything. Things change, and already they'd all say if you really start to get some realizations, some real insight into the reality that things change, life changes, partners change, things break, jobs end, houses break down, you get sick, and that you will die. And it demands a lot of practice because we know it intellectually, but we just live in denial of it. If you really start to get a realization of this, already your life has changed. Already you'll become more happy and more fulfilled and have less fear. Because the fear of change is what drives us so shockingly, isn't it? We know that. So much suffering in life because of change. We can't stand the thought of change. Okay, we like change when it comes to good things, changing to the good, but we can't, but if something is going well, we've got life, we have a relationship, we have a family, we have beloveds, we have children, we have a job, which is what attachment wants, we can't bear the thought that we won't have it. We live in fear of losing it. This is really clear. So much of our suffering comes from this, the insecurity we have, our anxiety and worries and fears, isn't it? But when we start to understand the reality, things change moment by moment. There's two levels of impermanence that Lord Buddha teaches. There's the regular, obvious one. Break, husbands leave you, bodies break, and death comes. That's obvious level. Somebody said unmuted. Why don't you mute yourself? Mom Dude. Who is Mom Dude? Mute yourself, please, my dear. Okay, that's good. Fantastic. So we can see this. So we can see. Okay, so I always use the example. I always think I shouldn't use it because it's like talking about her behind her back. Nicole Kidman, the Australian actor. I love the woman. But I'll never forget, it's such a vivid example. When she was still with Tom Cruise, I remember reading an interview with her in Vanity Fair. You can tell I'm old. I don't read social media. I'm on social media. I don't read it. I don't know the password, but I have subscriptions to Time magazine, subscriptions to the Wall Street Journal, subscriptions to Financial Times, subscriptions to Vanity Fair, subscription to Vogue. I'm serious. You can tell I'm old, you see. And I type with one finger. I look at people typing with two thumbs. I cannot get over it. I don't know how you do it. I'm just blown out. I type my messages with one finger. I type computers properly. I can't imagine using thumbs. You can tell I'm old immediately, but even old people do it now with their thumbs. Even fat people. I saw this guy with big fat thumbs. He was he was typing with his thumbs on his little iPhone. I was completely blown out, you know. Anyway, apart from that. So I read this interview 20 years ago, whenever she was with Tom. I can't remember. It was so vivid. It was such a perfect example of how we all are. So everything was beautiful. Their life was great, you know. Nothing wrong. Wonderful to have a good life. How amazing to have a lovely husband, to be in love. They said they fell in lust, not in love, you know. We understand. That kids' life, their life, everything was great. Going beautifully. How marvelous. How fortunate. And she said at the end of the interview, and we will be together until we are 80, she said. Now, what's happening there? Because attachment's getting what it wants, this is really what runs the show, where there's constant emotional hunger, there's attachment, there's neediness, there's expectation. So when it gets what it wants, which is called happiness, which is where everything goes nicely, we're terrified of losing it. We're living in fear of losing it. I mean, this is how we are, because we already know from our countless past lives that things do change. So we're constantly living in denial of it. So we build up this terrible tension in us, so instinctive, that because it's nice, you assume it'll last forever. There's no logic saying, and we will be together till. In other words, because it feels good, we put this extra layer of nonsense on top of it that says, therefore, it's going to last. We say it feels like it's going to be forever. There's no meaning to that. That's a projection that we do from this primordial grasping at things as permanent, because we can't bear the thought that it could change. Are we communicating? This is really, so getting in touch with the reality of ordinary impermanence. Forget, they have one called subtle impermanence, which is really like similar to, you can confuse it for emptiness. Forget that. And this is hard enough. But interestingly, the next sentence she said, she was so wise, and if we won't be, I will be devastated. And of course she was devastated, because he left her for Penelope Cruz or somebody. I mean, I joke when I say that. But then I read another interview with her, and she was devastated. She was in fetal position until her mummy kicked and said, get on with life, you know. And now she's with an Australian singer. Thank you. And I've got two children, Faith and Hope. Sunday and Faith. I read the papers. Human beings, it's all human beings, isn't it? So we put, it's clear, nobody on the planet can guarantee you'll be together till you're 80, but because it's beautiful, we think like that and we believe it. So of course she'll be devastated when it changes. Some people live in that fear. I mean, one woman, I remember in the class, and many people like this, some of you people might be like this, we've got our different fears, haven't we? She said, I live in fear every day that my husband will die. What can I do? How can I live in the moment? I said, well, forget living in the moment. Just decide that he will die. Confront the fact. I wasn't going to say to her, oh, don't be silly, he won't die. Of course he's going to die. But I said, instead of being afraid of it, then think, oh my God, he will die, and I don't know when, so don't waste 1 second of it. Make the most of it. Do you see my point? And then if he is awake, if you wake up in the morning and his body's still warm, then it's a bonus and you can rejoice. Do you understand? So confront the fact that it's true he will die. Face it. Then the conclusion is not panic, but make the most of it. That's the real point that they talk about. Make the most of this precious human life, because it will end at any moment. Instead of living in denial of death, or instead of obsessively thinking about death, panicking about death, recognize it's true, but then the conclusion isn't panic. The conclusion is I mustn't waste it then. I mean, people I know who've like been very sick and have been told they're going to die and then they become alive again, they all say that. They're trying to treasure every second. Because part of the problem with all these delusions in our mind, especially grasping at permanence, they just default. We just take them for granted. We don't even think. We're like thick as posts, you know. Ignorance is so strong in us. So we need to get wake-up calls sometimes. So the Buddha's sort of saying in this meditation on death and impermanence from the very beginning when you first meet the Dharma, don't wait till you're nearly going to die. Don't wait till you're on death row or have a car accident or get cancer to realize that you're dying. You're dying already, you know. You're on, as Lama Zopa says, we divide the whole world into living people and dying people. It's true. And of course, we're living people. Why? Because you've been told you've got a disease, you know. It's so absurd. He says living people are dying every day. I mean, these are truths. We know it's true and it's not cliche. So really learning to realize every day of your life, well, before death comes, and if you can really learn to confront like this and live in the reality of impermanence, you won't waste your life. And then you'll be ready when death comes. It won't be fearful. That's very clear. We say, oh, well, you know, I'll manage when death comes. Ridiculous, you won't. So why not do the work now, you know? And then, and the Buddha's simple point is this: we suffer because our mind are full of these misconceptions. That's why we suffer. We don't suffer because, you know, our husband's going to leave us. We don't suffer because our cup will break. We don't suffer because we're going to die. We're suffering because we can't bear the thought of it. That's the tension. That's the worry and the anxiety. Worry and anxiety is just attachment, thinking of what will happen, if only will happen, maybe won't happen, could happen, will not happen, shouldn't happen, if only that. And so we're terrified and trying to hold on. You can't hold on. You can't, there's nothing to hold on to. I mean, we suffer so much like this every day. You know, we know this. Of course, this takes time, facing reality, facing the reality, becoming familiar with this reality. So the way they frame it, there's a meditation we do. There's sort of like an analysis we can do. The first is to come to the conclusion that to really train ourselves to see when we open our eyes. We can do it as a meditation, but also you just apply it in daily life. You know, that the first one is death is definite. Everyone's going to die. We know all these words, but we've got to say them until somehow something touches us, you know. So you don't just say, oh, death's definite, death's definite, death's definite, hoping for a penny to drop. No, you're doing your meditation, you get someone a taste for it. And then your daily life, how would you apply it? Well, you go every day, you look around, the ant that just died. That ant thought it was permanent. It was walking along as permanent as anything, and suddenly it's dead, you know. Big surprise. You know, you see all the pictures from the wars, and there's this one little family in Ukraine, mummy, daddy, and the kids with their suitcases walking across the road. Right there. On one side of the road, they're living, the other side of the road, they are dead. We know all these stories. We hear it, but it's like between 32 walls and us. We can't hear it. It doesn't touch our heart, you know. Or it makes us afraid, so we don't think about it. So the thing is to get afraid of it. The wake-up call is, this is the thing every time, the wake-up call, the conclusion, you do this thinking, or you notice, you read the papers, you know. So instead of like, oh, you Russians, how dare these Russians, Mr. Putin, this, and get angry and upset, or get political, you take it as a teaching. It's like a teaching. And you say the words, this will happen to me. I'm so sorry. This will happen to me. That's when you make it the wake-up call. Because unfortunately, because we don't want to know about it, everybody dies but us. Other people out there die, isn't it? Even when it's your beloveds, even when it's really your beloveds you are really close to, even we don't get it, even then. We get grief and sadness and loss, but we don't get the wake-up call, which is, this will happen to me. That's the wake-up call. That you can't get past that one. You've got to confront that one. So then what's the point then? Well, the first point is death's definite. Then the next point is, it should scare the life out of us. The time of death is not definite. That's a fact. We don't believe that for 1 second. So if the time of death is not definite and it's true, then that means logically I could die today. And I'm telling you, I've been saying these words for many years and I still don't believe it. I say it with conviction. Look at me shouting. I know it's true, but I do not believe I'm going to die today. I am certain and I really mean it. In my being, I am certain I will wake up in the morning. Are we communicating? That's how deep the delusion is. And we know this is not like emptiness where you got to squeeze your brain, you know. This is fact, evident to anybody with heart. It's scientific fact, but it shows how deep our attachment is to life and me, and how unbearable the thought is for the thing to happen, you know, for the bad thing to lose what attachment has got right now, which is like me and life, this body, you know. So the time of death is uncertain. That really could be a wake-up call for us. And then the conclusion from these three, the conclusion point isn't fear and panic. This will happen to me. So then this is the point, and this is what takes time. And this is the Buddhist point. That at the time of death, which is when the body and the mind separate, the body turns into dust and the mind continues, dependent upon the karma in your mind, into the next life that your actions have created. No one sends you anywhere. It's not random. It's a natural law. And that's the part that's surprising to us. It's a natural law. At the time of death, taking this Buddhist view, that we've got, given that we've got everything we think and do and say sows seeds in our mind, given that we've got countless past lives, given there are billions of karmic seeds in our mind that we have put there that haven't yet ripened, given that everything I think and do and say in this life will sow seeds in the mind, and that at the time of death, one karmic seed will be the one that will determine my next life. Given that negative seeds, which is, we're going to go into this, an action that I do with my body and speech, are the heaviest ones, driven by attachment or anger or whatever, that harm another, leave us negative seed in the mind that'll ripen as suffering. And given that my virtuous actions of body and speech, driven by a virtue, will leave positive seeds in my mind. And given that I do want happy life and not a suffering one, though it follows logically, we can deduce the only thing that's of any use to me at the time of death are those virtuous karmic seeds. This is a logical deduction based on this view. So if that's true, in other words, like if you've got to get on a flight tonight, or not much day left, let's just pretend, let's say, you know, you've got a flight tonight at midnight. Got a flight. Got to get to the airport. So the only thing between now and then, it's a simple example, but it really makes sense. Between now and then, the only thing that the only things that you will do, the things you will choose to do, will be what will get you to the airport on time with your bag packed and get you on the flight. You wouldn't start, you know, painting the walls. You wouldn't start washing the sheets. You wouldn't start suing your husband. Are you kind of seeing my point? You've got a deadline. It's a good term, a deadline to be at the airport at midnight. So the only things you will choose to do, everything will take second place. You'll prioritize. And what you prioritize will be what will get you to the airport with your bag packed. Are we communicating? And everything else will disappear as secondary. Oh, well, the wall can wait. Hubby can wait. Lawyer can wait. What the hell, you know? That's when you start to really realize about impermanence and death. You get this wake-up call, and it energizes you not to waste this precious life. You don't want to waste time thinking about meaningless rubbish, because you don't want those karmic. You don't want to, you know, you can't bring your kitchen stove and your things with you in your bag. You just got to pack a few things and get to the airport and take your flight to the next life. Are we communicating?
Yeah.
But you've got to think about it. because we attach to everything, you know. I remember another silly example. I remember when I was living at Land of Medicine Buddha in California, which is in Northern California, which is where all the redwoods are. I couldn't stand it. I mean, redwoods are lovely, but they're a bit like church for some people. And I said some rude words to some people when I gave a talk. What's that big place in California? It's like big rocks, very tall. And all that in pure natural people think it's like heaven practically.
Sedona.
Say it again.
Sedona.
No, another one.
Yosemite.
Another one. What?
Yosemite.
Could be Yosemite. I gave a talk to all the workers at Yosemite, and I made a comment about all these ridiculous rocks. You know, it was like it's like criticizing God. It was so shocking, you know. But anyway, all I know is I didn't like all the rocks and all the trees, all these big redwoods. You can't see the damn sky, you know. So I wanted to go to the beach one time. So I sometimes I would do these editing retreats. So some friend in Puerto Rico, little baby island in the middle of the, you know, America bought, because it's strategic, isn't it? They bought this little country, 4 million people or something. And so some friend there has a Buddhist center, and she invited me to come and give a talk, which also she found a spot for me to just do for 9 weeks, my editing retreat. And it was heaven. It was just heaven. It was in the sun, it was the beach. I had the sea every day, you know. I'd go swimming. I had this pink, I bought this piece of, I don't have a swimming suit, what do you call it? I bought this pink stuff to wear as a sarong, but everybody still knew I was a Buddhist nun. They'd go like this to me, you know. I thought I would be invisible, but you know, well, I'd hope they'd think I was had cancer or something. Anyway, I'd swim in this pink sarong and walk in the pink sarong and lie in the grass and the sun and edit in the pink sarong. I had a lovely time. But the point is this: I had 9 weeks. 9 weeks. So what I'm getting at is a sense of urgency when you have a certain period, isn't it? There's a sense of urgency. I had 9 weeks. I'd look in the day, and one day it'd be sort of one day gone, another day gone. So there's a sense of panic because the time is running out. You've got a vivid idea there is a deadline, you know. So therefore, I didn't waste it. It's very simple. It's not as if, imagine if I'd forgotten that I had to leave in 9 weeks. I start getting attached to the things and attached to the next door neighbours. I want to sue the guy because he's playing too loud music, and attached to all the beach. And then when Rita, and after 9 weeks, Rita comes and drags me out and I'm screaming and kicking, so I forgot, so I had to leave. That's how we are with life, you know. So I had this vivid awareness every day that I didn't want to waste. It's just an analogy. I didn't want to waste. I didn't wake up in the morning, oh, I'll swim tomorrow. It doesn't matter, you know, I'll paint the walls instead. Or no, I used it. And then I was packed my bags and I was ready to go to Boston where it was 10 below. I remember that. So it's having, and often you see, it's interesting, we think, well, if something's impermanent, of course you're going to be scared because it'll end. It's not true. This is a 9-week vacation. What about just a 2-day vacation to a lovely resort? You don't say, oh, what's the point of just only going? It's only 2 days. No, because it's only 2 days, you enjoy it all the more. You make the most of it. You don't just lie there and go, well, I'll go to the beach tomorrow. You can't be bothered and just spend the whole 2 days in bed. You'll go here, you go there, you'll use it because it's going to end in 2 days. So impermanence, if the hubby is there, yes, he will die, and you will die, and your children will die. And once you get used to that, it just sits inside you. It doesn't become a frantic thing anymore. It becomes implicit for you. Impermanence becomes implicit. And so you have a sense of urgency and a sense of joy, not wasting this precious life. That's the conclusion. Very sensible. That's the conclusion. Don't waste this precious life. That's understanding impermanence. Then you won't be afraid of death then, because it's just, you know it's going to come, but you don't go on about it. We go on about it now because we can't stand to think about it. So when it comes up, it's like a panic attack. It's just, you know it's going to come one day, and you'll be ready when it does, because you live your life accordingly. You have your practice, you give up. And so that means, because you know using this precious life means not wasting it. And wasting it, using the Buddha's view, is not doing dumb things, not hurting others and being lazy and lying and killing and stealing and being attached and angry and jealous and depressed, running around like we say in Australia, running around with a chook, running around like a chook with your head off. A chook is a chicken. Anyway, you don't waste your life. You live a life of ethics. You do your practice every day and you delight in it, knowing that you're sowing lots of delicious karmic seeds in your mind, because you need lots of delicious karmic seeds. This is just for your own benefit. This is not discussing being kind to others yet. This is for your own benefit. So what do you think, people? Any more questions? This is the attitude we need to develop. Then your life completely changes. When you have a bit of an understanding of impermanence, your life changes. You become more vibrant, you become more positive, you don't waste your life, you want to be virtuous, you want to only accumulate virtuous seeds. Sometimes that sounds very selfish to us. You know, like you're just sort of thinking of it like money, you know, put all this karma in the bank. But there's nothing wrong with that. It's intelligent. You need lots of virtuous karmic seeds in your mind because that's the process that produces you, and you want good conditions in the future. We don't think that's silly in life. We know very well you prepare for the future. You have pension plans, and you have nice things, and you have good health because you want the future in this life to be good. We all accept that as a very sensible thing. Well, all we're doing is discussing here, taking care of our future. It's very practical. Because it's not up to anybody else. You know, there's no creator. You have to impress. You'll make sure you're taken care of. You got to prepare yourself. This is the point. We're in charge. This is the Buddhist view. That's what comes from karma. We are in charge. We are the boss. We produce ourselves. It's up to us. So have enthusiasm for your future. Want a good future so you can carry on your spiritual path. It's very sensible. But this view takes time. We're not used to having it, you know. And if we have the Christian view, it's similar, but more you're putting it in God's hand. You're a good person and you have faith in God, and God will take care of you. Okay, it's a similar idea, but different. But here we have to take care. I mean, you can have support, but we're the one who has to create our own future. That's the Buddha's view. What time is it? 9 o'clock, nearly 9 o'clock. Time to finish. Any questions here? Any questions, people? Any questions?
Robina, I have a
Yes.
question.
Yes.
So, given the concept of impermanence,
Yeah.
is it a correct view in using your story that you told earlier about not being happy in Yosemite but being happy in the beach, that because of impermanence we should figure out how to be happy at Yosemite?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, there's just me cracking a joke about.
I know.
Yeah, of
I
course.
know.
No, totally, of course. Oh, absolutely. If no, okay, no, well, that's a bit of a different discussion. No, that's a different discussion. That's giving up attachment. This is about impermanence.
Okay.
But of course, the question is totally valid. So then that means, you know, yeah, of course, learning to be content wherever you are. Learning the opposite of attachment is being content, because attachment is always dissatisfied. When it's really serious, it never likes anything. It's always finding fault, isn't it? We know that. So yeah, of course, giving up attachment is really profound. We're going to go into that. Giving up attachment means being content with now. Yeah?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Totally correct. Exactly. What else, people? Any questions before we finish? No? Anything on there, Kobita?
There is an online question.
Good, darling.
Okay, a major theme is on regarding death surrounds the importance.
You mean a major thing? You mean there are several questions?
No, this is the
Okay, good.
question.
Okay, good.
The question reads, a major theme with regard to this conversation on death
Yes.
surrounds the importance of a qualitative state of consciousness.
Yes.
What is the Buddhist view on what is consciousness, or how does it arise in a sentient being?
Well, that's the actual central point of the entirety of the Buddhist worldview, what consciousness is. That is what the Buddhist view is about consciousness. That is it, because consciousness is everything. Okay, so what's interesting here is you said qualitative. So the word consciousness, when we use it this way, I think in our use of the word, in our culture, consciousness has got an extra flavor to it. It is a qualitative thing, not in Buddhism. Consciousness and mind are literally synonymous. So that's the point about it. It's not so you could say qualitative awareness, that's different, but consciousness is a term that's a synonym for the word mind. Your mind, your consciousness. And what that is your capacity for cognition. So for the Buddha, mind or consciousness is necessarily not physical. It's not a function of the physical. It's inextricably linked at different levels with physicality, but not itself physical. It is not the handiwork of a creator. It is not the handiwork of mummy or daddy. It does not come from nothing. It's a continuity of mental moments. And the law of karma runs that river of mental moments. The law of karma is such, as I said, that every millisecond of what we think in our consciousness and do with our body and speech based on what's in that consciousness is the process that transforms our mind into a happy or suffering person now and in the future. And this consciousness of ours is literally beginningless and endless, because if you posit the law of cause and effect, which is the law that runs this universe as far as the Buddha is concerned, then by definition you can't have a first cause. So consciousness is the point. Consciousness is, and its job, the job of the mind, the job of our consciousness is to cognize or to be aware or to know. These words are synonymous. So then you ask the Buddha to cognize what, Buddha? And he says, guess what, honey child? That which exists. So when your consciousness has been completely purified of all the neurotic states of mind and completely developed perfectly in all the virtuous states of mind, you have now become a Buddha, and your consciousness, your mind now pervades the universe, knows that which exists without mistake, has infinite compassion for all beings, and has infinite power to be of benefit to beings as long as time exists. All right? That was the answer. What else?
Yeah, there's no comment coming back that I see.
Okay. Good. But the word I thought was interesting, qualitative, because we use that word differently here. But for sure, but we could say the better use of the word there would be awareness. But that's the job of our mind. And it's the absolutely central player in the universe. And as far as Buddha is concerned, all our experiences, all the happiness, all the suffering, all the hell realms, all the God realms, all the Buddhahood, all the happiness come from the mind. The mind is the creator of everything. We don't need an external creator. We do fine creating our own mess, and luckily creating our own happiness as well. We're the boss. And the mind is the main thing. Mind or consciousness. I think it's time to go home or bed or somewhere. Yes. Okay, that's it. We done for now? And that's the background. So then we'll go into details about practices tomorrow. We'll talk more about karma. We'll talk more about attachment for sure. And we'll look at some of the practices to do at different times and talk about what to do. Yeah, we'll go through the death process, how it works, what happens. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. And we dedicate. So we just think, I'd say it in ordinary words, won't do a prayer. But the dedication means here we've been 2 hours, and as many moments as there have been is as many karmic seeds we have planted. It's an inexorable process. You can't not be creating karma every second. All these seeds we planted, how marvelous. Maybe nourish them with our effort, our work this moment forward. So that these seeds, as we motivated in the beginning, may they ripen in the future, no matter how long it takes, as our Buddhahood, so we can be a benefit to others and ourselves. And may bodhicitta, compassion bodhicitta, grow and grow in the hearts of all. Changchob, sem chogram poche, ma ke panam, ke guchig, ke panyam pa me payang, gong ne gong du haba shog. That's it. Thank you, Petals. Are you all staying here or you go home? Where do you go? Home. Nearby.
Somewhere here somewhere.
Okay, very good. Okay, darlings.
Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you, sweetheart. So what time? 9 o'clock, yeah. So then